This is Paul Schmid. Welcome to the Pursuit Zone. In the summer of 2010, Leigh Timmis pedaled away from his home in England to begin an around-the-world cycling adventure. Somewhere along the way, he realized that cycling every painstaking and dangerous mile of the journey is not as important as enjoying it. Leigh cycled in support of the Derbyshire Children's Holiday Centre, a charity that provides week-long holidays to children in need. After 7 years, Leigh wrapped up his adventure a few days ago, and you can learn more about it at his website, pedal360.com. Leigh Timmis, welcome to the Pursuit Zone.
Thanks very much, Phil. Thanks for having me.
So, Leigh, I want to go back to the beginning and learn, how did this whole adventure start? What were you doing before you set off?
I think to go right back to the initial idea of where this came from, you'd have to probably go 2 years before I set off. I was self-employed in the northeast of England, working far too hard after university. I struggled with some depression, and I ended up going on a motorbike trip to Iceland with 2 friends, and we just spent a month off-road in the middle of nowhere having these incredible adventures. I came back from that, and I decided to quit everything. I went backpacking for 2 years. I lived in New Zealand and Canada and did some traveling around Southeast Asia. I had a background in mountain bike racing, and I think there was one night when I was living in Canada, we had this conversation with 2 friends, and just this idea came out. I'm going to tie these things together. I'm going to ride a bike around the world. And I didn't even know anyone had done this before. So I came back with this idea, extravagant idea of what I was going to do. It worked for a year, and then I just took off on it.
You were, your mountain bike racing background, was that sort of like semi-pro, or what was that about?
It was amateur. There's 3 levels in the UK. There's elite, which are the professionals. They go to the Olympics and stuff like that. There's expert that I was racing at, and then there's sport. So I raced for a team, but I wasn't getting paid for it. It was paid for, but I wasn't paid for it.
And was that all in the UK?
Yeah, there's a national series in the UK. So you travel around Scotland, England, and Wales.
You bring these ideas together. You want to have this amazing adventure, but you mentioned that you didn't know that anybody was doing this sort of thing. Well, how did you learn about it, or did you go out and try to do any research?
Yeah, this is the first bike tour that I've ever done. So it was not a background that I had any experience in. I started to research it, and then I did realize that obviously people have done it before. Somebody did it on a penny farthing. I don't know how long ago, 100 years ago, something like this. And then more recently, there's some other famous names that I've started to look up as well. From those inspirations, that's actually how I came up with the beginning of the route. There's a cyclist called Alistair Humphreys in the UK. There's another one who became a really good friend of mine, a friend called Glenn Sabaton. And they both cycled a similar route from England towards Australia. One did it one way, the other did it a different way. But that became quite an inspiration for me. So to look into these things, but I never looked into a lot of the reasons behind it as well. So I didn't really know where I'd be going. I knew a rough idea, a direction, that I'd be going east. But then I didn't really know where I'd be going, the countries and the landscapes.
Tell me about your bike.
The bike's name is Dolly. She's a handmade steel frame from the city that I live in. I custom built the bike for myself. So I approached the company and said, look, I'm going to ride this bike around the world. You're from the same city as me, and you export these bikes around the world. Maybe we can work together. So they sponsored the frame, which was super kind. And then I approached other companies for the components. Some gave me parts at a cost price. Some didn't help me at all. But I just built up a bike that was basically strong and reliable. From a background in mountain biking, I kind of wanted something a little bit more exciting, carbon fiber and suspension forks and hydraulics, but none of these things were going to work. If I had a problem in the middle of the mountains or the desert, I didn't want to have things that I couldn't repair myself. So that's how I built the bike up. As I was coming towards the end of that, I thought it was important to give this bike a name. It's the bike that I'm going to travel around the world with. So I named her Dolly based on a suggestion that somebody came up with on the internet. I don't even know how they came up with it, but it stuck with me because I I'm from a city where the football team is called the Rams, and we get a lot of abuse from the neighboring cities. They say the things that we might do with sheep are a little bit questionable. We don't, but it came to my mind that the first cloned sheep was called Dolly as well. So I quite like the idea of this Derby boy riding a cloned sheep around the world.
Where is your town? What part of the UK?
I'm from a city called Derby. It's in the Midlands. It's close to Nottingham or Birmingham, right in the Midlands. It's on the edge of the Peak District, which is quite a beautiful part of the UK.
Before you set out, what kind of a budget were you dealing with?
From the books that I'd read and the research that I'd done, I thought that £10,000 would be enough for 2 to 3 years, which was my original expectation. Obviously, that changed along the way. I think I've gone through two economic crises on the bike, not personally, but globally. And in 2010, it was kind of the peak of the economic crisis at that time. So the pound went a lot less distance than I expected it to. I had to change the route due to that.
It's such a big adventure. It's kind of hard to just talk about every single country that you've gone through. I guess first of all, have you kept a count of how many countries you've gone through?
Yeah, I only tallied it up recently, and it's much lower than I expected. People go on adventures for much shorter times and go through more countries. The total is 51, I believe.
What did you think it was going to be?
Oh, I think there's close to 200 countries in the world. I thought that I must have seen most of them.
Well, what were some of your favorite spots? What were some of your favorite moments on the trip?
It's really hard to say. I go through so many different favorites. Some of the favorites are based to how small man can feel in nature. I think that's one of the most wonderful things about bike travel. In this world that we live in now, we think we're so powerful with the technology we've got to think with, the computers, and with the technology we've got to travel with. With airplanes, you can go halfway around the world in a day. And to put yourself just to yourself and a bike, no phone, no connection with the rest of the world, and to see what is actually possible was one of the most amazing experiences. So for that to be out in the wilds was incredible. But then at the same time, to be surrounded by local people, another beautiful thing about the vulnerability of the bike is how it opens the doors and it opens people's hearts. So you get to go in to local people's houses that you've never met before, and you can spend the day with them working in the farms. I spent a day in Uzbekistan driving a man's taxi, just randomly. I met him in the road. Oh, can you drive a car? Yeah, I can drive. Come on. So I drove around. And then you spend the evenings eating with their family, sharing the house, sharing the meal, and you share their life. It's a very beautiful experience. So for favorite places, it's so varied. I would say if there was a single favorite part of the world, Asia was fantastic. I spent a long time in Asia, and in particular the Silk Road. It had such a combination of the things that I loved, the varied landscapes from deserts to mountains, hospitable people, and such an incredibly different culture from the culture of Europe.
When you were driving this taxi in Uzbekistan, were you guys going around and picking up fares?
Yeah. Yeah, I don't really know how this came about. It's one of those strange days. I was at the beginning of a town. It was maybe one of the first days in Uzbekistan, and the police were trying to push me away from the market. I don't know why. It's through Central Asia. I did have problems with the police, with the military as well, but it's just the way that they want to restrict things. So I was trying to get in here, and nobody spoke English. It was all Russian around there. This man came over and he spoke English to me. It turned out that he'd worked for 2 years in the States. So he said, "Oh no, it's okay. He's with me." He invited me in, and we went and had lunch at a small cafe. And he was explaining to me the problems with petrol. It was so limited there. We drove past a huge traffic jam, and I wondered what was going on. So he explained, "Oh, they're all waiting for petrol, for gasoline. It's so limited that there's just not enough to go around, so it's rationed." We started talking about cars and then the taxis. He said, "Oh, yeah, do you drive a taxi?" "Well, I don't drive a taxi, but I've got a driving license." "It's okay. Come on, jump in." So we're just taking people around. We're picking them up. He's explaining what's going on. And it's one of those great experiences. This doesn't come up in your own life. And I don't know how these things happen, but there we go. Yeah, taxi driver for a day.
What kind of car was it?
I don't know. It rattled a lot. Um,
Was
and,
was it was it a manual transmission?
yeah, it was. Yeah,
So that was useful. You had that skill to be able to drive that.
I'd never considered that that skill would have gotten me into an unusual experience like that. But maybe 14 gears on a bike is too much. Just a manual gearbox in a car would have got me around the world.
Leigh, what did you find the most challenging parts to be, or the most challenging parts of the world?
The most physically challenging part would certainly be Tibet. To go to cycle up to 5,500 meters on a bicycle. I mean, the beginning was a climb from the Taklamakan Desert up into the mountains, and that climb alone took days, just days of climbing. And the snow came. I was a month late going up there. I planned to go much earlier. I had to wait for equipment for the cold. So when I got up there, it was supposed to be clear. It was supposed to be before the snow came, but I was up there in the snow. It's minus 40 degrees in the middle of the night, just camping in a small tent. There's the chance that it might have been forbidden to ride up there. So I was living almost like a fugitive up there, trying to hide all the time, evading any contact with people. So to be in the cold, to be in the altitude with very low oxygen, it's a place that it was so difficult to go through, physically demanding.
Well, what happened? I mean, because if you're trying to evade people, then it's going to be difficult to find food and to get some warm shelter. What eventually happened? Did you get caught and get kicked out?
Yeah, so I spent the time up there. I was mostly in the tent. There's very few people up in that part of Tibet anyway. I thought that I'd be going up and seeing the cultures, and I don't know, it's such a beautiful life that you see in National Geographic or something like this, but it was absolutely empty. It was the middle of the winter. There was nobody around. I occasionally found miners, Chinese miners, that were living in ships' containers up there, and they'd wonder what on earth I was doing there. They'd invite me in, and I'd have a meal with them and sleep in there, and then the next day carry on. There are a few abandoned buildings up there that occasionally I'd sleep in as well. The worst part was trying to find food. I think it was 2 or 3 weeks I went through that, and you'd come to some towns that were purely military, and you just have to go into the shop and just be like, I really hope these people don't ask me what's going on. I was really lucky. Nothing happened like that. A police car came past one day. The guy got out, and he was like, "Wow, you're awesome. Can we have a photo?" So I've got a photo of me with a policeman in Tibet, just doing like the peace sign. It was really good. After 3 weeks, I did come to the next checkpoint. They have checkpoints along the road. They stopped me to check my documents, and there was a document that I didn't have. So they're like, "Okay, well, we're going to have to keep you here. Tomorrow we'll go to the main police station. We'll sort through all the paperwork. We'll get you the document and you can continue cycling." I was like, well, this is fine. It's no problem. It gives me a time to rest. And the next day I can continue. We got to the main town and it hit the fan. The policeman was furious. What are you doing up here? It's forbidden. There's no way you should be here. There was the Tibetan uprising. For foreigners to be here is illegal. All this stuff. I had to pay a fine. I had to sign the papers to say that I was in this wrong place at the wrong time. And they kept me up there for a week to decide what to do with me. After this week was up, they came to this small room that they put me in. There was no heating. It was freezing cold up there. It was still very high. They came to take me from the room, and they played this good cop, bad cop routine. With the bad cop, he was arguing with me so much. They wanted to take me back to Central Asia, where it'd be impossible for me to get into because of the visa that I'd had to go through before. And I was arguing, look, I've done nothing wrong. I'm just riding a bike for your country. I just want to go towards Nepal. Please, can you just take me that way? If I'm not allowed to cycle, that's the way that I need to go. No, 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 we're taking you back. Okay, well, at this time, from the food that I'd been eating in Tibet, I was quite sick. I had some diarrhea. I needed to go to the bike. So in the next room, they were keeping my bike. And the good cop was in there. I was explaining how all I wanted to do was ride on. I've not done anything wrong. This cop just wants me to go back. He's not helping me at all. And the good cop just turns to me. He's like, so how much money have you got? Oh, in my pocket, I maybe had $200 and $50 more in Chinese currency. He turns to me, oh, if you give me that money now, I'll take you to Nepal tomorrow. Boom, money's in his hand. The next day, we charge off in this little 4x4, bikes in the back. We go over the Himalaya. It takes 2 days to get there. We go past Mount Kailash. It's a famous mountain that many people make pilgrimages to. The police took a photo of me next to it. It was really nice. And we come to the Himalayas to drop down to Nepal. And this descent is the most wonderful thing. I didn't realize that for 3 months probably, it had been a world with no life in it. There was no trees. Everything was frozen. The way that the wind would hit your skin, it was bitingly cold. It was furious. And to descend slowly, and the world starts to warm up, and slowly there's trees with leaves and then red flowers. I wound down the window, and the wind caressed my skin. An insect, a fly, landed on my arm, and I realized I've not seen insects for months. And then the smells started to build, and the children playing in the street, the smell of shampoo, the local cafes cooking traditional Nepali food, and life was coming alive again. It was incredible. Maybe 20 kilometers before the border with Nepal, the police stopped. Like, you can get out and ride down now. I was like, well, this isn't the border. What's going on? Oh no, we've taken this week. We're gonna stay down with our friends at this lower altitude. It's much warmer. You can get out and ride on, and we're gonna stay here. So they used my money to stay there, and it's fine by me. For $200, you can't get a tour through Tibet with two crazy policemen. But it was the first time that I'd used bribes to get my way. But it was quite an experience. It was quite wonderful to be up there with them.
Man, that was an amazing description. It almost sounded like you were reading from a book.
Oh, well, maybe in the future I can turn those words into. It's one of the dreams that I got for the future. But the stories along the road are quite vivid. There's some really amazing times. Hopefully we'll get a chance to describe a few more of them for you.
So were you keeping a journal?
Yeah, it's something that I didn't really think about when I left. When I left, I used to write down the distance and the time that I've been riding every day and a few notes. But it was more about the photography for me. I think that's the way that I was trying to find my way in the world. But after a while, I found that the things I was writing, the thoughts and the way that I was changing mentally, they were reflected much better in a diary. And so I became quite strict about it. I ended up taking very few photos towards the end, but my diary entries could be 3 or 4 pages long. And it was much more about the emotional changes I was going through, or the things I was learning from people, or just notes from learning languages, or the experiences were so rich, and I didn't feel like the photos could really capture all of those things that were going on.
Just a quick question about these policemen. Were they Chinese policemen or Tibetan policemen?
When I arrived at the checkpoint, it was a mixture of both. And the Chinese policemen were much more efficient in finding out what was going on. I think I sat and played computer games with the Tibetan policemen in there, and they were super kind. They gave me a talisman, a little good luck charm for traveling, it was a bronze disc with all the animals of the Tibetan calendar on there, which was great. Yeah, there were both types of policemen up there, but very different types of people.
I have a question on here. The question is, what is the farthest away from home that you ever felt on your journey? Would you say that it was that time with the police in Tibet, or is there another moment?
I think it's another moment. It follows that time. So I'd been through Central Asia, and it was quite a visa minefield to get through there. It was very difficult to get through. And then there was the whole experience in Tibet where I'd gone through the hardship of the environment, the difficulty of being arrested, and then the drop down into Nepal. I cycled through Nepal for a few days trying to find a place of peace. I think after all of those experiences, I really wanted to just find a place where I could rest for a while. And I sat on a campsite outside of Pokhara, outside of the place where a lot of people go to do the treks in the Annapurna circuit. There was a lot of tourists, so I was trying to find a place that was more peaceful. And I found this campsite in the middle of nowhere. And I sat and I was just reading a book, and I had this moment. I think if there's a moment of enlightenment, I found it there. It was as though all of these hardships that I'd gone through, everything that had challenged me along the way, that I thought could probably stop this journey. Before that, I never knew if I'd possibly make it around the world. And I'd gone through all of that, and I sat in the foothills of the Himalayas reading, I think I was reading Hemingway or some book like this. And suddenly life just seemed so incredible to have ridden a bike from this industrial city in the middle of England to a world of monkeys in jungles and incense and prayer flags, temples and monks. And the world was so different, and it was just on a bike that I'd gotten there. I think that was when I really felt that I'd cycled a long way. I really felt the furthest that I've felt from home.
So you set off for this solo, I think. Did you do most of the adventures solo, or did you meet up with other people and cycle with those people along the way, or how did that kind of work for you? And do you prefer one way over the other?
I think to cycle solo or to cycle with other people are two very different experiences, and they're both wonderful. I think to cycle solo, you have this incredible connection with the world around you. People see this vulnerable person on a bike and they want to speak to you. The doors are open. And because you're just one, you're not sharing this journey with somebody, you're not having an experience together, you're much more approachable. So for your connection with the world, that's fantastic. But I think it's also really nice to share the journey with somebody else. I shared 6 weeks through Turkey and Iran with another cyclist called Charlie Walker. And there were other cyclists, maybe just for 1 or 2 days through the States. And then through Mexico, I cycled for 3 months with a guy from Japan. And when you look back on these times, I know that I'll always have somebody to share it with. I'll be able to pick up the phone and phone the guy that I was cycling with and be, oh, do you remember that time we were in a small hut with a guy with all the sausages and the big photo behind him? And just to have those opportunities to share, I think that's really nice. So the two different types of experiences are equally as nice. I think I probably spent about 90% of the time alone. And I'd rather to have a bit more time with somebody else. But I wouldn't change the way that I traveled around the world. I think both experiences had such nice benefits.
Did you cycle through the U.S.?
Yes, I did. After Asia, I flew from Beijing to Anchorage, Alaska, and then up to Fairbanks, and then started going all the way south. So through Alaska, I got to Canada, and then I cycled down the West Coast through Washington, Oregon, and California.
Did anybody throw anything at you from a car?
In the States, no. I did have this experience in Canada, though, which is quite disappointing. It's something that, you read accounts of adventures around the world, and I think quite often people want to share the more, the worst of humanity. You often hear of problems with people throwing things or being threatened with knives and guns or being attacked or robbed. And I didn't have any terrible experiences around the world. My general impression of the world is that it's full of kind people who want to help you. There are only a very few occasions when people did throw things, normally in more troubled areas. Kurdistan, the border between Turkey and Iran, we had some stones thrown at us, and in Morocco, I had problems with that as well. But you find this to be more of like a learning curve, a way of acceptance. The one in Canada, somebody just threw a bottle of Coke over me. Well, they threw the bottle at the bike and it smashed on the bike, which was quite a shock at the time. But it was quite disappointing to experience that in the Western world, where we have an understanding of each other. But after that, I was explaining it to somebody, and they invited me into the house to wash the bike, wash my clothes. Don't worry, just settle down, and I want you to understand that Canada's a really kind place. You just had a really bad one-off experience, so no problems.
Any issues with dogs?
I think there's always dogs. When I started out, I remember Turkey had a lot of dogs that wanted to chase me, but very quickly I just started copying the farmers. When the farmers just pick up a rock and the dog runs away, they think it's going to be thrown. So if you see dogs coming up, I just picked up a rock, held it above my head, and they just didn't bother to come close enough to be threatening. So that was never a problem. I probably had more encounters with the wildlife in the north of America, in Alaska and the Yukon, the bears, the moose. I had another one with a mountain lion, if you want a lovely long story about that.
Please.
When I arrived in Alaska, everybody warned you about the wildlife. So you're going to encounter moose and bears. They were the two things that people were most concerned about as a cyclist. And I was camping wild through all of that. You go through hundreds of kilometers without meeting anyone or finding a place to stay. So it was always in the tent. So people warned me that the moose will be protecting their young and bears will be foraging for food. So you've got to really keep your food away and stay away from the wildlife. The first day in the Yukon, I think it was, I'd just come into Canada and it started to rain I put up the tent down a dry riverbed and I was cooking away from it. But as I got into the tent after dinner, the rain really started to come. I wasn't, maybe I'm a bit lazy. I'm probably quite careless. I wouldn't recommend this, but you're supposed to put the food in a tree 100 meters away from the tent. You hoist it up so that if a bear's going to try and find it, they've got to struggle to get it. It gives you the time to run away. This night, there was a tree 5 meters away from the tent. It was raining. I was like, okay, we'll put it up there. It's not going to be a problem. Never had any bears around before. So get into the tent and I'm writing my diary and I hear a rustling under the food. And in my mind, I'm thinking of all the nights to have a bear around the tent. This would be the worst. What a terrible time. If it can find the food, it can find me. I'm so close. So I look out the tent and there's no bear, but there's a large animal. No idea what it was. Somebody had told me that there's this creature called a marten in the north of America, in Alaska and Canada. So I thought, oh, maybe this is a marten. It's bigger than a large dog, got a cat-like face and big paws, and it looks at me. It's ducking down behind some grass, looking at me through the mosquito net in the tent, and I'm looking at it like, what a beautiful animal, lovely, lovely animal. I wonder what that could be. What a marten. Martens must be these wonderful creatures. And after a while, it's kind of in this pouncing position. It looks up and looks down, and after 5 minutes, it walks away. I think nothing more of it. Pack the tent up. For the next few weeks, I'm having experiences almost every day with the black bears in the road. They're just foraging for berries and food in the side of the road there. And one day I went around a corner and nearly hit a bear. I was probably 2 meters away and had this experience where the only thing that I could think of to prevent being attacked by a bear was something that a friend in Anchorage had told me. There's this rhyme that he'd been teaching his 3-year-old daughter. It was something like, "Hey bear, ho bear, what you gonna do?" So I'm just standing with my bike singing this stupid little song to this bear and edging away from it. Anyway, all these experiences come along. And at the end of Canada, I'm talking to this guy about the animals that I've seen. And I'm explaining this, what I think is a marten. And he said, oh, there's no animal called a marten that's like that. It's a small rodent. I don't know what you'd have seen. He had a book with some pictures of animals. He showed me a bobcat, which was much more furry and kind of rough looking than this other thing that I'd seen. So I well, there's maybe one other thing that you might have seen, but it's so rare. I'd be surprised if you saw this. He shows me a picture of a mountain lion. It's exactly the same as what I'd seen. It was incredible, like even in the same pose. And I was like, if I'd have known there were lions in the north, lions live in Africa. They don't live up here. I would have been petrified. I've been running out of that tent or finding something to hit it with. But I think maybe that naivety is what saved me as well. I think the mountain lion's probably there going, this guy doesn't even know a lion. There's no chance I'm going to attack him. He's not running away or anything. So yeah, the wildlife in the north of America was much more adventurous than the dogs of the rest of the world.
Yeah, that's amazing, the mountain lion. I think mountain lions are pretty shy and try to stay away from people.
Yeah, I think people should be quite shy of them and try and stay away from them as well.
So, Leigh, how challenging was it to keep going? I mean, how challenging was it for you to keep up the motivation day to day?
I think I'm naturally quite a stubborn person. Generally, on the ride, I was finding that I loved my life. We talked a bit earlier about the route that I chose, and originally it was built around going down to Australia. I could stay in Australia if I needed to earn some more money, and then I'd cross the Pacific and ride through to the Americas. But by the time I got to New Zealand, I loved my life on the bike so much that I just kept going. I wanted to go around the Pacific instead of flying across. So motivation was not a big problem for a long time. I truly loved what I was doing. There are times when life is difficult, when you struggle through monsoon seasons or you can't find food, you don't meet people for quite a while, or you meet people, I would meet people and have great relationships and then be sad to leave them. And through these times, there were a few things that I would do to keep myself going. Small incentives, like, okay, if you just ride for another 2 hours, you can stop and have a cake. Or I realized that music became a very motivational factor for me. I'm affected by music quite strongly. So if I put on some upbeat music, that would keep me going as well.
So what did you like to listen to?
Off the top of my head, what would I have listened to? probably some kind of electro music that I didn't have to think about too much, but it's got a strong beat going on. I like to meet people around the world, and I loved it when they shared their music. I remember after Australia, I was living with quite a creative group of people, and they gave me loads of new music. But if I could remember any names off the top of my head, I'd be surprised.
What kind of music do you typically like to listen to?
I tend to enjoy things like I quite enjoy the electronic stuff from Radiohead. When I was going through South America, I picked up a lot of music. I got into listening to music as a way of learning the language, as well as picking up something from the culture. I enjoyed listening to the music they dance salsa to, or that music like Buena Vista Social Club, that kind of really Latin feel, and you get this feeling that when it's going into your head through the headphones, it becomes a part of your soul as well as what you're looking at outside. It's quite a wonderful thing.
I find that too sometimes. I use Pandora, and I have just this channel on there. It's just Brazilian music. So if I want to work and get some stuff done, but yet listen to some music, I put that on because I don't understand the words, so I don't pay attention to them.
Yeah, yeah. I had that with China. I did learn some Chinese while I was there, but when you put on some Chinese music, I can't understand the poetic meanings behind the construction of the sentences and stuff like that. And you get this beautiful feeling. It's somehow being lost within the music as well as in the landscape.
You had to stop on some occasions to do some work. What kind of work were you doing?
Yeah, so I stopped twice. I stopped in Australia for 6 months. I was working in a restaurant there. And then I stopped in Taiwan for just over a year. I was teaching English.
How did you find that experience teaching English?
It was great. In fact, I've always worked in education. After I left university with a degree in film, I used that in the education system to create projects that interested children more. So I'd work in schools where the kids were struggling or where the kids were excelling and they needed something more to inspire them. And it was nice to continue that as part of this journey. Working in the schools in Taiwan was really rewarding. I learned a lot from the kids. I also learned a lot of the language while I was there as well. But it's something that I wish to do afterwards as well. I think, when you just see the lights in children's eyes, that when children's eyes light up, it's a beautiful thing, and you can be there to inspire them, continue making their dreams come true. I think that's a really nice thing. So it was a pleasure to do that as part of the journey, and to earn money through it, to continue what I was doing was important anyway.
So give me an example of one of these projects that you're talking about that ties in with your filmmaking background.
As far as projects on the bike go at the moment,
No, I mean, like you said, you were using your filmmaking background, I think, if I heard you correctly, to work on some projects that would help children learn.
okay, so for example, there was one of the companies I worked for was called Creative Partnerships, and they created relationships between anybody in the creative industry, whether they're dancers, storytellers, chefs, musicians, I don't know, ceramics artists, filmmakers. There was one project that was really good. It was based on Africa, where the schools brought in different creative people from Africa. For example, the children learnt how to cook African food and then taste it from an African chef. They learnt African stories from an African storyteller. They learnt how to dance these gumboot dances from an African dance group. They learnt how to play musical instruments from Africa and then listen to a band playing traditional African songs around them. And my job within that was to help them to document it in a different way. I think even with these great experiences, to then sit down and write an essay or to do a drawing of it, it kind of misses the point, especially in this world where children are surrounded by such incredible media every day. So I would be there and we'd make animations, we made documentaries, we made news programs, little music clips. And then at the end, there would be like a small film festival where the parents could come in, watch what they'd done and ask questions. And at the end of that, where the parents could ask questions, I remember after school and mum would ask, oh, what have you been doing at school? I don't know, some stupid maths or whatever it was that day. But these kids were alive. They wanted to tell you about all the spices that they've eaten, the kind of dances that they do and why they do it. And so for me, that was the most beautiful thing. I was at once explaining this stuff about the world. It was the world that I'd not even gone into yet. It was before I started traveling. but to enthuse people with new means of communication.
You were like the facilitator as a teacher to help the children create these animations and so on.
Absolutely, yeah. It was nothing to do. I was just facilitating their own desires. I couldn't. It wasn't me making anything for them at all.
Well, in addition to stopping and earning some money, how did that, just having that time in one place, how did that help you mentally, I mean, in terms of being able to continue with the journey?
It was very important economically. It would have been impossible to continue without stopping to work. Mentally, I think it was very important as well. Speaking to other people who have gone on such long journeys without stopping, I think they find great difficulties. It became a time when I could sit back, reflect on what I've done, maybe recharge my batteries. For example, when I was in Australia, I created a new plan, a new adventure to go through the desert that I'd never considered before. Having that opportunity to sit, talk to locals, get maps, and understand what's around. Also, another benefit was, for example, in Taiwan, to be able to sit and learn Chinese. Then that opened up a a much deeper experience when I got to China. I'd go through small towns, and when people talked to me, not expecting a response, I'd be able to talk to them, not fluently, but enough to get by. And especially in a country that's difficult to travel in if you don't speak the language, I think that became a real benefit for me. It changed the way that I traveled after that.
Is that Mandarin?
Yeah, it was Mandarin, yeah.
Leigh, can we talk about this boating incident?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, that's crazy. When I was reading through your website to learn that you had come very close to dying on the boat. Can you tell us the story?
Yeah, so when I left, my idea was to circumnavigate the world in a flightless way. So I wanted to travel across the land by bike and then across the ocean by boat through sailing. It became obvious that I wasn't going to be able to do that. After the problems in Tibet, I cycled myself into a corner and I had to take a flight to Southeast Asia. It was something that I didn't mind, but then I always knew that there was this sailing that I wanted to do in the back of my mind. So I arrived in the north of New Zealand with some contacts that could help me to sail. There was an old lady and her nephew who had a boat, and they were going to sail to Fiji. So I met them and I stayed on the boat with them, but they were trying to help me get on a different boat to Australia. It was a much bigger boat. There was space for my bike and all my gear. There were 7 people on it. So I ended up helping them for probably 2 weeks. We were working on putting a new engine and exhaust system into this old 1920s boat. It had been around the world a couple of times. It was the flagship for the New York Sailing Club for a while. It was a beautiful, beautiful boat. And every day I'd ask them if I could sail with them, but they were looking for somebody with more experience. So I wasn't very hopeful that I was going to get on there. They kept refusing me. And so I started to build plans that I would stay in New Zealand, wait for my 2 friends to come back off that boat, and then we'd sail to Fiji together. On the last night before they left, there was a young girl on the boat. I think it was her 17th or 18th birthday. We had a big dinner in the yacht club, and the wife of the captain took me to one side and she asked if, actually, we need somebody else on the boat. If you wouldn't mind coming, that would be great. But by then I had different plans, so I decided to stay in New Zealand. They left the next day, and 2 weeks passed. The day that they were meant to arrive back came and went. 2 days, 3 days, 4 days. And slowly these rumors started to build that actually there'd been this huge disaster in the Tasman. Turned out that the boat got into a huge storm. I think there were 10-meter waves, and the winds were so strong they shredded the sails. They sent a message back to the weather forecasters in New Zealand to see what they could do to get out of this situation. He sent a message back saying, I'll send you these coordinates. You need to get to there. It's still gonna be messy, but it's gonna calm down. You're gonna get out of the way. Send me a message when you get there. They waited a day. No message came back. 2 days later, no messages. Search and rescue went out to find out what had happened. No wreckage was found. Not even no fragments of boat were washed up on the ocean on the shore. They think that what probably happened, this old boat just snapped in two in the waves, and nothing was ever found. Which is terrible for me because I was staying on the boat that belonged to two of my friends who were out on this boat, waiting for them to come back. It was a very difficult time to go through, and then after that, it was my turn to get on a boat. I had to find another boat after that. And then we sailed up to Fiji for 9 days through a storm as well, which turned out to probably be one of the most frightening experiences.
Yeah, that's kind of that's sad and terrifying.
Yeah, and it's also one of those experiences where you realize that every small decision you make can change the rest of your life. Like it would have been if I'd have said yes, it would have been to go on a boat that was reliable and it was with a very experienced captain. But it can just be your time at any moment. I feel very grateful that I didn't make the decision to go on the boat. But at the same time, maybe taking a left turn instead of a right somewhere down the road would have led to a similar disaster. You just really don't know.
Leigh, tell me a bit about the charity that you're supporting.
So I write to raise money for the Derbyshire Children's Holiday Centre. Um, they take 660 children from the city that I'm from. They're normally children with um, a less affluent background, if you like. They're children who have adult responsibilities. Maybe they're carers for their parents, or they just don't have the opportunity to have a childhood at home. They don't have a background with enough money to have nutritious food or to take a break to get away from home. They could be from backgrounds with mental, physical, or sexual abuse as well. So these children just need a break. They get the opportunity to go with 20 children of a similar age between 8 and 14. They're taken out of the city. They go to the coast where the charity has a special house. They get the chance to just hang out and be children. They get good food. They get the opportunity to experience different things. They can go to the theme park there and to the beach. They also contribute to their social growth while they're in this center as well. So it's educational and entertaining. It just gives them a break. I think as I've seen the world and the problems that are in the third world, I can't help but think that in helping to make a new generation that's more trusting, more caring in the first world, then the third world will follow. It always seems that we're trying to put a band-aid on the problems that we've created through our own politics or our own businesses in the West, when actually, if we just change our outlook towards the way we treat the rest of the world, that would probably be a much better step towards a better world. So I really think that creating a better opportunity for the youth of our own countries will help to make the world a better place.
When you were on the road, what was the best piece of advice you got from another traveler?
We were talking about the time with Charlie Walker earlier. And before I met him, I'd cycled through Europe, and I think my existence was basically on Battenberg cake, Swiss roll, maybe some sandwiches, baguettes here and there. And to travel with Charlie had cycled through deserts and stuff before. He'd done a trek through Mongolia, I think. And so he came to this journey with a much greater understanding of how to live in the wild. He showed me the kind of things that we could cook with these primitive stoves that we had. And he showed me a much more adventurous outlook, or more survival skills, I guess. But the one that I'll always remember is, yeah, the way that we cooked, just to get basic foods from the markets, vegetables, rice, and make these meals. That would have been the best advice that I got. To spend that time with him was educational in so many ways, but probably the food changed the way that I traveled for the whole time after that.
What kind of stoves did you have?
They work with petrol, so you can actually fill the bottle with diesel, kerosene, anything you can find that's flammable, I guess. And they end up working much better at altitude. If you use the ones with the camping gas, the little gas bottles that you can get, I think they don't work so well at altitude. They're difficult to find in most of the world as well. So I think the exact name of mine was an MSR Whisperlight or Dragonfly.
Any regrets about taking 7 years to do this adventure?
No, I would never change what I've done. I really think that the way that I traveled and the length of time that it took, it just went on its own course. I didn't push anything. It was great. The only thing that I would regret is not having done it earlier. I think I spent a lot of time in my youth pursuing the social expectations. You know, you're expected to get a job and get a promotion and a house and start a family and get the car and all these things. And I think I fell for that for a long time. Only leaving when I was 28, I think that would be the one thing that I'd regret. But the experience in itself is so wonderful, and I would never regret it. Like, if I'd have done it much later, I think that would be much worse. But no, no regrets.
What advice would you have for someone that's just starting an adventure like this?
I think my advice would be the same as it would be for anyone in any walk of life, to make decisions based on your own happiness. I think it's very easy to get too focused on achieving something that won't actually be beneficial to you. I think the way that I ended up in this life, this on this journey, was just through making decision after decision that the outcome would make me more happy. And so on the adventure, it would be the same. Is going to this country going to be a more adventurous one? Is it going to be more difficult? Is it going to cost you more? What it really came down to for me was, is it going to make me more happy? And I think that that really helped me along the way. It would help me to guide myself towards the next adventure as well. I don't know what that would be at the moment, but I think always focusing on your own happiness is the most important thing.
What advice do you have for a younger version of yourself?
At school, I didn't pay attention to some of the things that eventually would have been very beneficial on this journey. Knowledge of history and religion, geography, and probably most importantly for me, if I could just sit and just give myself a piece of advice for when I'm at school, I would have learnt languages. How wonderful that was, to open up this deeper experience in the world.
What was your favorite piece of kit?
In the 7 years, technology changed so much, and there were times when people were very generous, and I was sponsored a phone which gave me, well, it wasn't, I couldn't use it as a phone, it had no SIM card, but it did give me access to the internet whenever that came up, which is something that changed hugely. When I left, I used to have to find an internet cafe or a place where I could use somebody's computer. And then over the 7 years, Wi-Fi is all over the world. You can find it in cafes and town plazas. Upgrades in technology like GPS as well. Somebody gave me a GPS for the bike. And all these things were wonderful. But actually, the most basic necessities became most beneficial. When I left, I had this tiny one-man tent that was incredibly uncomfortable, and I had to peg it out. I couldn't just, it wasn't freestanding. And after a year and a half, I upgraded that to a two-man tent, which had all this space I could sit up inside. And at the end of the day, when it's raining and you need somewhere to throw your clothes, and if you can get them away from all your other things, if the wet things can be separate, it's wonderful. And to have space to stretch out. So really, my favorite thing was the tent. It gave me this environment at the end of the day. When you close the zip, suddenly you're in this world that's just so safe to you. You don't care about what's going on outside, the storms that are raging, or maybe people are going to find me. Suddenly this sense of security is the most wonderful thing.
Yeah, you're home, you know?
Yeah, it becomes your home.
Leigh, what is next for you?
I'm hoping to write a book. That's probably the next target that I've got. In the meantime, I've already got a few engagements for bike speaking festivals. There's some cycle touring festivals that go on through the summer here. So I'll be speaking at those. And also to continue working with young people. I'd like to have the opportunities to go into schools and inspire children to pursue their dreams and to do more wonderful things with their lives. I think that would be one of the best things that I could do with my achievement, to help others realize their own dreams too.
Leigh, I got to give you a bit of a hard time here, because when I was reading through your blog, it says that you're a master of procrastination. So how are you going to get this book written if that's the case?
Oh, yeah, I know. It's one of those things. Maybe it's a great thing. Maybe it's a terrible thing. Yeah, I'm the guy that set off on a 2-year, 3-year journey and took 7 years for it. I think procrastination is sometimes wonderful. I've had these times to just reflect, and maybe I sit and think, or I don't know if I'm putting things off or just doing it in a more thorough way. I think at the moment I'm lucky to be surrounded by people who are pushing me, and I have no doubt that they're going to push me to do these things that I really believe I can make something nice of it. And if someone just kicks my ass a bit, I'm going to get out there and do it.
How can people find you if they want to learn more?
You can find me through my website, pedal360.com. And through that, there are connections to a Facebook group, Twitter, I've got Instagram as well. So it can all be found through there, Pedal360.
Leigh Timmis, thanks for coming on the show. Congratulations on your achievement and also on the fundraising that you did for the Derbyshire Children's Holiday Center.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Recorded April 25th, 2017. For more great podcasts, visit thepursuitzone.com.